Judge Harris thought he could silence Pam Bondi with a fine. But he was wrong. Pam is not someone easily intimidated, and when faced with his unjust decision, she used her legal brilliance to challenge his authority. Tampa District Court, Florida. 9 a.m. A routine business dispute hearing between two companies took place, as usual. No media. No press. Just lawyers, judges, and a few legal staff. But no one in the room that day knew an explosion was about to happen. Pam Bondi, the attorney representing the defendant, walked through the heavy wooden door, carrying a briefcase, her eyes sharp. And on her, a crisp white shirt with a large black print on the chest. Freedom is not a privilege. It's a right. The shirt made no noise. But it silenced everything. She walked past the rows of seats. Court staff glanced at the phrase on her shirt, then quickly looked away. The court clerk swallowed nervously. The plaintiffs exchanged glances, whispering. No one said a word, but everyone knew something was about to happen. And sure enough, Judge David Harris, known for his extreme conservatism and principles, saw Pam and his expression darkened. Judge David Harris, sitting up straight, his voice cold, not hiding his displeasure. Ms. Bondi. This is a courtroom, not a place for personal opinions. You need to change your clothes immediately. If not, I will fine you for violating the principle of neutrality. Pam Bondi, walking to the defense table, placing the briefcase down, turning to face the judge, her voice calm but firm. Your Honor, I fully understand the seriousness of the courtroom. But this shirt does not disrupt the trial. It does not cause chaos. It only represents my personal belief, something protected by the Constitution. Judge Harris, interrupting, his voice rising, his brow furrowing. Personal beliefs have no place here. The courtroom is a neutral space, no symbols or messages that could be considered biased are allowed. Pam Bondi, taking a deep breath, her eyes locked on him, her voice sharp as a knife. Without a hint of hesitation. Your Honor, I am not carrying a political banner. I am not shouting at anyone. I am not wearing a badge or raising a symbol. It's just a shirt. A phrase. A basic right. Inside the courtroom, everything went silent. Even the court stenographer stopped, her hands hovering above the keyboard. Pam Bondi, tilting her head, arms crossed. Her voice no longer that of a lawyer, but of a woman ready to take on the entire system. If I am fined today for this shirt, I want to know exactly which statute I am violating. No one spoke. No one moved. And from that moment, the confrontation officially began. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick, like an impending storm. No one moved. There wasn't even the sound of a keystroke. All eyes were fixed on two people, a lawyer standing tall like a stone pillar amid the storm, and a judge struggling to maintain control, which was slipping further out of his grasp. Pam Bondi didn't glance at anyone. She didn't need support. She didn't need anyone to stand by her side. She only needed the truth, and the courage to speak it. She took a slow, deep breath. Her hand rested on the wooden table in front of her, her gaze locked on Judge Harris, unblinking. Pam Bondi, lifting her head high. Her voice not loud but resonating like the sound of a steel bell in an empty church. I'm not standing here to argue about a shirt. I'm standing here to question a fundamental principle. When does expressing a belief become an act worthy of punishment? And more importantly, who gives themselves the right to decide that? Someone in the room swallowed nervously. A lawyer on the plaintiff's side subtly tilted his head, paying more attention. Judge David Harris, sitting up straight, his spine rigid like it was made of solid wood. Hands clasped tightly in front of him, his voice flat, trying to maintain calm. Ms. Bondi, this courtroom operates by rules. And I am the one authorized to ensure these rules are upheld. If I believe a symbol, a phrase, or an action could skew the balance of neutrality, I have the right to demand it stops. Pam didn't interrupt. She waited. Let him finish. Then she took a step forward. The entire room seemed to shrink with her movement. Pam Bondi, standing before the podium, lightly resting her hand on the table. Her voice dropping lower but every word hitting like a hammer against glass. The problem lies right there, Your Honor. Because if neutrality can be defined arbitrarily, then it's no longer neutrality. It's a weapon. It's a shield that those in power use to silence anything that makes them uncomfortable. She raised her head. Eyes locked on him, as if daring him to meet her gaze. Pam Bondi, her voice now cold, each word falling like a blade. And if a phrase about freedom, nonpartisan, not oppositional, is considered a threat, then I ask you, what is truly being protected here? Neutrality, or absolute control? Silence. A chilling silence. Everyone held their breath. The court stenographer stopped typing, her fingers hovering in midair. A court staff member behind shifted slightly forward, as if afraid to miss anything. Judge Harris shifted in his seat. His hand rested on the arm of his chair, tightening slightly. He looked toward the court clerk, as if seeking confirmation. But she didn't look back. She was looking at Pam. Judge Harris, his voice harder, clearly straining to regain his composure. You're politicizing a professional rule. The courtroom is not a place to display personal views. I am expressing. I am not turning this place into a stage, but I will not stand still while you turn it into a pressure chamber for personal beliefs. A brief flicker in the judge's eyes. Someone in the room frowned. No one expected, Pam wasn't just counterattacking. She was rewriting the entire game. Judge Harris, his tone dropping, but sharp. As if trying to cut off the rhythm of her attack. You are crossing the line, Ms. Bondi. Pam Bondi, slightly tilting her chin, her lips tightly pressed. Then letting out one final statement like a lock clicking open for the next door. No, Your Honor. I am going to the very edge of the line, to point out that it is you who has drawn it arbitrarily. And today, I am here to ask again, who is the one truly crossing the line? The atmosphere in the courtroom was now so tense it was almost suffocating. The moments that followed felt endless, as if standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into a bottomless abyss. Every gaze in the room was focused on Pam Bondi, standing across from Judge Harris, one of the most powerful figures in this room. But now, his power was slowly crumbling before their eyes. Pam Bondi, shaking her head slightly, taking a step toward the podium, her hands firmly placed on the table, her sharp eyes fixed directly on the judge. As if she could see through every layer of the power he had tried to build. Your Honor, I am not the only one expressing personal identity in this courtroom. She calmly pulled a document from her briefcase, holding it slowly, as if preparing for a decisive move. Her gaze never left the judge, still resolute and straightforward like a warrior unafraid. The entire room turned towards her, as if they knew she held a deadly weapon in her hands, the truth. Pam Bondi, her voice rising, steady but unmistakable. Each word emphasized as if striking directly at the deception being hidden. Just 3 months ago. Another lawyer stood at this very podium, wearing a shirt with a phrase supporting community education rights, along with a small badge, and he was not reprimanded. No warning. No fine. The room fell silent. A few people exchanged looks, while one nodded slightly, as if they had seen something they didn't want to. The discomfort began to spread throughout the room. But no one dared speak. Pam had seized this moment, and she knew she was putting the judge in a difficult position. Pam Bondi, her voice now cold, sharp like a razor, each word deliberately slow. Clear, not allowing the judge to dodge the question. So why am I being fined today? The same action. The same form of expression. But the result is different. Is this justice? This was the moment when the judge could no longer just sit there and pass judgment. Judge Harris began clenching his hands on the table, looking down at the wooden surface. Not daring to meet Pam's eyes. For a brief moment, he seemed to be thinking, as if trying to find a plausible excuse, but he realized that all his arguments now were weak. Incapable of justifying his actions. Judge Harris, eyes not daring to look at Pam, his voice softer, struggling to contain the rising confusion. You're making this difficult for me, Pam. This is not a personal matter. Pam Bondi, refusing to accept the excuse, taking another step toward the judge, her voice as hard as steel, no longer patient with the lies. You cannot say this isn't personal, sir. It is your rules that are personal, unfair, biased rules, applied only when you feel it's right. That's the issue. Pam paused. Her eyes locked firmly on the judge, showing no fear or hesitation. Each word she spoke was like a sharp blade stabbing into the pride of Judge Harris. He clenched his fists, trying to remain calm. But clearly, he couldn't escape the challenge that Pam was presenting. Pam Bondi, her voice lowering, emphasizing each word, no need to shout or make noise, the truth spoke for itself. This is no longer about rules. It's about a deliberate choice. Choosing who gets to remain silent, choosing who gets to speak. And today, I refuse to be silenced. The courtroom now fell into a deathly silence. The gazes from the lawyers, from the observers, began to change. Some in the room even couldn't hide their astonishment and admiration at Pam's strength. Judge Harris, once the most powerful figure in the room, was now trembling under the overwhelming presence of a woman. Pam Bondi, looking at the judge, her voice calm but sharp as steel, no doubt or hesitation about her decision. Today, I'm not just fighting for myself. I'm fighting for everyone who has been oppressed by power without knowing how to resist. The courtroom felt suffocating. Every eye was fixed on Pam Bondi, standing firm like a tower, unwavering. Her gaze locked onto Judge Harris, who was trying to maintain a calm expression. But deep inside, he knew that soon he would have to face an undeniable truth. Pam Bondi, her face calm but filled with determination, her voice steady and unwavering. Each word like an arrow aimed directly at her opponent. Your Honor, I request that you provide a legal justification for fining me. Until now, all I have seen is an unfair decision and an abuse of power. You cannot impose a penalty simply because I am wearing a shirt with a personal message, with no legal basis. Judge Harris, his voice still strong, but with a slight hesitation, his hands gripping the armrests, clearly no longer as confident as before. Ms. Bondi. This courtroom is a place for the rule of law, not for personal expression. If I allowed you to express your personal views in this courtroom, there would be no end to the chaos. Pam Bondi, leaning slightly forward, her gaze cold, no sign of fear, her voice firm and resolute. Chaos? Are you using that word to describe the right to express personal identity? A shirt does not disrupt order, Your Honor, but your abuse of power is what truly threatens this order. And I ask you to explain why such an illogical rule can exist in this courtroom. Judge Harris, sitting up straight, trying to maintain his composure but with clear wavering in his voice, lightly tapping his hand on the table. As if trying to hold on to the power he knew he was about to lose. That is the principle in this courtroom, Ms. Bondi. And I cannot break that principle just because of a shirt. If we lose our neutrality, we will not be able to administer justice. Pam Bondi, taking another step toward the podium, her eyes never leaving the judge, her voice sharp as a razor. No longer patient with his excuses. Whose principle is this, sir? Yours? Do you have the right to impose a personal rule with no legal basis? Or are you just hiding behind the guise of neutrality? Neutrality is not an excuse to impose power over others, Your Honor. Neutrality is to ensure fairness, not to punish those who hold different views. Judge Harris, his voice tightening. His gaze beginning to shift, no longer as firm as before, it seemed he had begun to realize his mistake but could not immediately admit it. You're challenging me, Ms. Bondi. I cannot allow this to set a precedent in this court. If I let you freely express personal opinions, others will do the same, and we won't be able to maintain the seriousness of the trial. Only you have the right to decide what is serious and what isn't. Personal freedom is a fundamental value in the Constitution. And you cannot use your power to forbid that right without a legitimate legal reason. If you cannot provide a valid legal reason for your decision, then, sir, that is an abuse of power. Judge Harris, silent for a few seconds, as if cornered, his eyes scanning the courtroom, finding no support from his colleagues, finally he took a deep breath, nodded. But his voice was much weaker than before. The fine will be rescinded. The courtroom breathed a collective sigh of relief, but that was just the surface of the issue. Pam knew this battle didn't end with a small decision like that. She was not satisfied with this ruling, as it didn't address the fundamental issue. Pam Bondi, nodding confidently. But not letting the rescinding of the fine overshadow the bigger victory she had just achieved, her voice still firm, her eyes cold and unyielding as she looked at the judge. "Thank you. But this is not about a shirt. This is about personal freedom, and that right cannot be violated by anyone, for any reason." Pam stood firm, not just because the fine had been rescinded. She knew this battle was no longer about a shirt, it was about a larger issue, personal freedom and its protection in the legal system. Pam Bondi knew that Judge Harris had been defeated in the courtroom, but what would happen next? Only when the judge was scrutinized, and the legal system had to face this public exposure. Would the truth be fully revealed? Therefore, Pam would not stop. She had left an indelible mark, but this trial didn't end here. The bigger story would continue. And Judge Harris would have to face the consequences of his wrong decisions. The tension still hadn't subsided. Pam Bondi stood there, like a stone wall, not only winning the case but also toppling a system of power that sought to strip away personal freedom. The entire courtroom was silent, as if no one dared to breathe, with all eyes fixed on her. Pam Bondi, with a determined expression, her voice strong and irrefutable. Each word she spoke like a punch against oppression. "We cannot let power impose unreasonable restrictions on us. Stand up and defend your freedom, because sometimes all it takes is one person standing firm to change everything." Pam's words rang out like a bell, not just in the courtroom but also awakening all those who had been silent. She wasn't just a lawyer winning a case, she was the defender of freedom, the one who had opened a path for those too afraid to stand up. Pam Bondi, standing firm, her eyes locked on Judge Harris. Her voice strong and full of resolve. "Today, I have defended personal freedom, not just my own, but all of ours. And I will never allow anyone to take away this right." Judge Harris couldn't say anything. His defeat wasn't just in the decision to rescind the fine, but also in the collapse of the credibility and power he had used to control. Pam had not only exposed his bias, she had made him unable to find a reasonable justification for his actions. Judge Harris no longer had his confidence. He knew that his career would never be the same again. Pam Bondi, with a firm and certain voice, without hesitation. "Judge, today I have proven that a determined individual can change this system. And you will have to face the consequences of your actions." Judge Harris, daring not to lift his head, his voice softening, nodding silently. "You've won." Pam was not satisfied with a shallow decision. She had proven that power could be challenged. But this battle didn't end here. Pam knew that only when the judge was scrutinized and his actions exposed, would the truth be fully addressed. She had opened the door to a larger struggle. Pam Bondi didn't just win the case, she had exposed Judge Harris's abuse of power, leaving him with no place in the system he had once represented. She hadn't just